Hey everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Hello and welcome along to this week's 5 Yard Dynasty. So I'm back, Dan, and as ever, I'm joined by Hannah. Hannah, how are we doing? You had a good week? Good show last week?
Yeah, good, thank you. Really nice show last week. Had a great time talking to Jason, but really excited for this week too. We've got a fantastic guest, so I think it's going to be an awesome hour.
Yes, as you can see, we are joined by the new CEO of Fantasy Points, Scott Barrett. How are you, Scott? You well?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, guys.
No, thank you for taking the time out to come on with us here.
Yeah, busy week, but nice, breath of fresh air, getting a chance to talk about Dynasty and some players after doing about 1 million demo and tutorial videos for our new data product.
So we were just talking off air about how you're literally living the dream. You do what we do for fun, for a living, but actually, as the videos are rolling, I was thinking about it, and it's probably more board meetings now than anything for yourself, right?
Yeah, I kind of live on Zoom these days, but no, it's definitely living the dream. My friends tell their friends that I get paid to stay at home and tweet about football in my boxers all day. So,
and how far off the truth is that?
Well, I won't tell you if I'm wearing pants right now or not, but yeah, no, it is the coolest job in the world, no doubt.
Yeah, that's fair. We're all jealous. And we'll say we all do it to put in a bit of time and out of sheer enjoyment. And the fact you get paid for it is phenomenal. And I know many aspire to get there. Many do get there. There's guys over here in the UK that work for many American sites and in paid roles. So if you're good enough, I guess the industry finds you, right?
It took me many years of hard work and working like 100 hours a week. But yeah, eventually I got there, and, the industry continues to grow. So there's more and more jobs that are opening up. Yeah. And I can't say enough about the industry as a whole, very supportive of each other. And it really is the coolest thing ever to get paid to sit at home in your boxers and tweet about football.
Yeah, I bet. So today we're going to have a look at some sort of ADP values and some trade targets, talking Dynasty. Do you get to talk Dynasty a lot anymore, Scott?
I usually don't, but oddly enough, I did another Dynasty podcast yesterday too. So yeah, I have a good read on. What's that?
It's all fresh in the mind now then.
That's right. Yeah.
Awesome. So Hannah, why don't you start us off with your one? We've each listed a few players here that we like their ADP values in kind of startup drafts or players that we've got we're trade targeting to pick up in rosters. We've got very little context around it. So whether we're looking at rebuilding or whether we're competing side, we've just kind of thrown some names out there, and I guess we'll add the context in as we go. So Hannah, why don't you start us off with one of your list?
Sure. I mean, I had a look at all of kind of the players that we put down, and I think my list is probably full of the most boring players that people probably don't want to target, but I do have a little bit of an explanation as why I think people should. So my first guy is Deontay Johnson, who's obviously a wide receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I totally get that he really isn't an exciting pick, really. I think people kind of forget how good he is, to be honest. We know that he had a down season in 2022, and he did finish as a wide receiver 29 in PPR leagues. But the previous 2 seasons, he actually finished as the wide receiver 18 and the wide receiver 8. I think one of the confounding factors for him having such a bad season last year was, of course, I think, as we all probably know by now, because people talk about it all the time, he scored 0 touchdowns. I mean, I just cannot see a world in which that will happen again. This is going to regress back towards the mean. And despite finishing wide receiver 29 last season, his underlying measurables, like all sorts of the kind of data that we see, that they are still there. Like, he was 6th in targets, He was 12th in red zone targets. That was with 15. There was only 3 other players that had 15 red zone targets last season. That was AJ Brown, Chris Godwin, and Russell Gage. And they all had 3 or more touchdowns. So he was the outlier there of the guys that had those 15 red zone targets. And I think as much as people don't want to admit it, Johnson still is the wide receiver 1 on that team. Until very, very recently, George Pickens was actually higher in ADP than Deontay Johnson. And I'm sorry, I just don't understand that. Pickens wasn't even the second kind of highest target earner on that team last season. It was Pat Freiermuth. So I honestly think that Deontay, he's like wide receiver 36 or something completely ridiculous to me at the moment. I think you should buy him at this price. And I can tell you now, he will outperform his ADP and his current value. So to me, anybody who's going to either rise in value or outperform for what you pay for them is a value, and you should be trading for him. Yes, you might not be excited about it, but you're either going to get some consistent and I suppose more value on your team when he's putting up points, or you can sell him when his value goes higher because people are realizing actually he's not as terrible as you all think. I think he's a criminally undervalued guy, and I think people should.
I'm a huge fan of Deontay Johnson. I've got Fantasy Pros in front of me. Current ADP has got Deontay Johnson at wide receiver 33 and George Pickens at wide receiver 34. Now, Deontay Johnson finished PPR as wide receiver 30 last year. So even if he returns on a down year, Scott, you're still going to get a positive return on that. Yeah, we should see a better performance from him, right?
Yeah, I agree with everything Hannah said, except for when she said he's unexciting. I think he's pretty exciting. I think he's a great value for everything you outlined. Obviously, one of the greatest touchdown regression candidates of all time. He's the only wide receiver to ever have more than 110 targets in a season, have 0 touchdowns. He had 147 targets. We know touchdowns tend to fluctuate wildly year over year. So yeah, absolute fantastic regression candidate. But beyond that, it's also just I think he's really good. Yards per target is never great. Last year it was historically poor. But he just does get a ton of volume. Last season, he finished 14th in targets per game. Over the 2 seasons prior, he had 10.8 targets per game when he was healthy. That was far and away the most of any wide receiver. And so why is he getting these targets? And it's probably because he's really good, probably because he's getting open at an inordinately high rate. And then lo and behold, if you look at ESPN's metric open rate, he led the league last year. He's ranked top 4 every season since he entered the league. And to me, it's just, yeah, this guy's good. He gets open at will. He's going to command targets. Targets are going to translate to fantasy points. And touchdowns, something that fluctuates wildly. Yeah, there's no way he scores 0. He'll probably score something according to my metric, 6.4 is what he should have scored.
Okay. So, yeah, his yards per catch year on year is incredibly similar. And I think I saw something that said if he had 3 touchdowns last year, he would have finished as a wide receiver 16 or something like that. So he would have almost half that value.
If he was perfectly neutral in touchdown luck last year, he would have finished wide receiver 32 in fantasy points per game instead of wide receiver 50. And again, I think it's not unrealistic to think he could finish as a high-end wide receiver 2 this year, because that's what he was doing prior to last year. And really, it was just the offense was such a cataclysmic mess that I don't think that's going to be the case this year, even if it is below average.
Awesome. So we're agreeing Deontay Johnson. Scott, who's one of the names that you want to have a chat that you're looking at?
Yeah, I definitely did not pick an exciting name, but I had to list him as my first player because I never expected to say this, but I was having a chat with my buddy Derek Brown over at Fantasy Pros the other day, just because I took him in a Dynasty startup we're in the 16th round. He was like, oh, I wanted him so badly. And that's Rashid Shaheed. And I'm like, yeah, I think he might be the most mispriced player in all of Dynasty leagues. And I feel like when I say that, I'm going to get a lot of people, scratching their heads over it. But to me, I just see 0 risk at that ADP. And I see immense upside from week 12 on. Shaheed gained 92 more yards than Chris Olave on only 11 additional routes. He surpassed Olave. Okay, Olave was a little banged up and all of that, but also just by yards per route run, the most predictive metric we have for wide receivers, he was elite. Here are the top 12 rookie seasons by yards per route run since 2007. Martavis Bryant was really talented, busted out because of drug issues. 2 OBJ, 3 AJ Brown, 4 Justin Jefferson, 5 last year Rashid Shaheed, 6 Jamar Chase, 7 Chris Olave, 8 Percy Harvin, 9 Hakeem Nicks, 10 Tyreek Hill, 11 Christian Watson, 12 Doug Baldwin, all superstars except for Martavis Bryant. And granted, like there's the small sample size concern with Shaheed, which was also true of Bryant, but still it's like this stat is like super predictive and no one's making an upside argument for him. Elite deep threat, really talented playmaker. He's going to have some spike weeks at the very least. And, who knows, maybe there's a little more talent there than people are letting on. And so, yeah, Rashid Shaheed you can quote me the ADP, but I know it's super low.
Wide receiver 70 according to Fantasy Pros at the minute, which even with spike weeks, he should outperform. I don't know. Do you not feel Michael Thomas coming back into the fold, new quarterback there at the Saints, might just have an impact on that?
Yeah, I mean, I just like don't really care. Like he showed enough to me in his rookie season to make that upside argument, which like this is what really matters in fantasy. And like the cheaper the ADP, more upside matters versus cost. Yep. It's also Michael Thomas. Like, should we really be banking on Michael Thomas? How many guys has this games has this dude played this past half decade? But yeah, I mean, so if Michael Thomas isn't back to full health, I see massive upside for Shaheed. And then even if that's not the case, he could carve out a role as like the primary deep threat wide receiver 3 for 11 personnel. I mean, he's probably not going to hit. He's wide receiver 70 for a reason. It's just that upside argument is really compelling to me.
I love Rashid in the situation of best ball competitions. I love him in the situation of like DraftKings and underdog type drafts, because I do think he will have spike weeks. I think your issue might be trying to pick and play when those spike weeks are in a flex spot and getting lucky or unlucky. I think it's one of those where if you're way down on your projected scores, he's someone you chuck in because if he hits, it will make a difference to you.
That was the league I took him in, best ball. He led the league last year in catches, gaining 20 plus, 25 plus, 30 plus, 35 plus, 40 plus, 45 plus yards. And so that's a stat that, yeah, you're going to get those spike weeks for sure. Start sit. He'll need this year Michael Thomas to go down, but I think he has some long-term upside as well.
And there's a realistic chance that Michael Thomas will go down. If he even gets up to start with.
If you're projecting missed games, like he's got to be top of the list.
Yeah. Hannah, you're in or out on Rashid Shaheed?
I think at cost, look, there's nothing to lose, is there? You're basically not really giving up any value to get him. And if he hits, fantastic. He's gained value either for you to sell on or for you to have on your team. And if he doesn't, well, what have you lost? So no, I agree with Scott. I don't think there's anything to lose here. It's worth a shot.
Fine. So I won't have a lot of Rashid Shaheed. And the reason is because one of my first names comes up as wide receiver 67 in relation to Shaheed's wide receiver 70, and I've gone for Wan'Dale Robinson of the New York Giants here. Incredibly injury hampered season last year, but I thought he showed enough to come on after his rookie bit. He sort of burst on. He had the game, didn't he, against Detroit, week 11, 13 targets, 9 receptions. He broke the 100 yards. No major standout bits, but he looked comfortable in what he was doing. The Giants wide receiver room, Paris Campbell, Jamison Crowder, Isaiah Hodgkins, Sterling Shepard, Darius Slayton. There's not a lot of major competition there for me. So at that stage, as we talk about gambling on Rashid Shaheed, Wan'Dale Robinson's talent coming out of college into the game is one that I'm okay picking up. And I'm hoping he might be a little bit more higher floor than someone like Shaheed week by week rather than spike weeks necessarily. Someone disagree with me and tell me why I'm wrong.
Yeah, so I'll disagree with you. I'm a Giants fan who was really high on Wan'Dale Robinson last year. He was one of my guys projected to go day 3 that I thought should have went day 2 and then ultimately did go day 2. The other one was Tyquan Thornton, which granted doesn't look too great right now, but post landing spot, he was drafted by Brian Dable, a really smart offensive minded coach, former wide receivers coach, with a great track record at the position. And there was minimal target competition. I really saw him getting peppered with, like, he had PPR cheat code as the team starting slot wide receiver, but he had this injury plagued year. And, it kind of seems like the moves they're making, they might be quick to just move on from, all right, he's not healthy. He's too small. He can't withstand the beating. We thought he could be our next Cole Beasley, and said he's our next Isaiah McKenzie, both 2 guys who played under Brian Dable. But you look at that roster, and that roster makes me nervous, because, like, whatever you think about Wan'Dale Robinson, he's only a slot wide receiver. He can't be anything else.
Yeah.
If the team goes more 12 personnel, he's probably getting taken off the field. And then you look at this roster, and they're saying Darren Waller's their wide receiver 1. They're saying, we're going to use him as like our big slot. Okay, so he's a slot. Jamison Crowder, what is he? He's a slot. Jalen Hyatt in college was 90% slot. Colin Johnson, big slot. Paris Campbell, best in the slot. And you just look at Sterling Shepard. He could play outside, but historically better in the slot. You're like, this team has 7 slot wide receivers. What are we doing? And so that's just what makes me nervous for Wan'Dale. The counter is, like, he's more talented than a lot of these guys, better draft capital than Jalen Hyatt and some of these other names.
You're just going to line up with 7 players inside the numbers.
I'm a Giants fan. They've done this for years. They did this in the Ben McAdoo days. I hate this. Stop having 4 slot wide receivers and 1 outside wide receiver.
Yeah, I mean, I got concerned when Waller came in, because I do see that drop down over the middle sort of passes being taken a little bit by Waller for comfort rather than someone like Wan'Dale. But I'm hoping he can come through. And again, a bit like Shaheed at wide receiver 67, 70, that late in a draft, I'm quite happy to stick him there. And if it doesn't pan out, I don't really lose myself too much, I don't feel.
I think, sorry, just quickly before we move on,
Yeah.
I think the problem I kind of have with Wan'Dale is that obviously we know he has that injury. They have, as we all know, 1 million slot wide receivers. So I just don't see them rushing him back either. So to me, he's probably going to be sat. Now, you might be able to put him, I guess, in your, your injury slot or whatever. But he's going to be sat on your bench probably for, I would say, this whole season pretty much, doing nothing for you and probably not gaining any value either. So he's kind of, me, wasting a bit of a spot there. If you've got a deep bench, then maybe you want to keep him. But I think I'd rather have a shot like Rashid Shaheed, where actually he could have some weeks for me this season.
Can't wait to see Robinson outperform Shaheed this year. Can't wait. And there's Hannah knocking me. Hannah, I'm coming back to you because your next name on the list shocked me. I'm not sure about you, Scott, but it caught me off guard when I read it.
So, again, I don't know. Maybe my kind of approach to Dynasty is a little bit different than maybe some other people's. Like, sometimes I do think that people approach Dynasty in that they want all the youth and they want all the upside. And ultimately, unless you can get all of those to hit at the same time, it's probably not going to win you a championship. Like, sometimes you do need, like, the boring, steady players to give you some floor. I think people often, they want to chase ceiling. They want the next new rookie. They want this guy that's suddenly going to pop. Oh, I found him first or whatever. And sometimes, as I say, I think people overlook kind of some of the good players in the league because they're boring. They don't want them on the team. They want somebody who potentially is going to increase in value. But to me, so my second pick is Derek Carr, the quarterback of the New Orleans Saints. So this is more of a super flex league take. I'm not saying please go and buy him in a 1 QB league because you're probably wasting your, any kind of, not money, but that you have. But look, we do all know what Derek Carr is at this point. He is your prototypical QB2. Over the past 3 seasons, he's finished at the QB 14, 14, and 16. And even, like last season when clearly there was like disharmony at the Raiders, he wasn't very happy. Things between him and Josh McDaniels were not great. He still finished as the QB 16. So I do think people are going to say, well, where's the upside? Like, why would I want him on my team? But he is currently going at ADP. I think he's quarterback 28. So, I mean, if you buy him as the quarterback 28, automatically you're going to get more out of him than what you paid for him. And I think he works actually quite well as a QB2 in quite a few different types of roster builds. So one is, go on, Scott, I feel like you want to jump in and shoot me down or say something.
No, I was going to let you finish. Do you want to finish?
Go on then, I'll quickly finish. But basically, I think you could pair him up with a like high upside QB, like an Anthony Richardson. So you've got someone who has a floor, but obviously you've got Richardson that's going to probably hopefully give you a good ceiling. But I also think he'd suit a contender. For me personally, I don't want to put loads of my value into my QB2. I'd quite happily have Derek Carr as my second QB. I know what he's going to give me, and I'd rather put kind of that value into a different player, a skill position player that's probably going to give me more, and hopefully that's going to be enough to get me over the top. I just don't want to put loads of capital in my QB2. I think that's personally a waste of capital. Just quickly, one last thing. He has also recently signed with the Saints, which means that they're going to have to keep him on the team at least until 2026. So he does have some stability there. There's not going to be question marks about where he's going to be next year, or what we're kind of discussing with things like Jared Goff and Russell Wilson. So I personally would happily buy him, but I know that a lot of people probably don't agree with me.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you. I don't know that I'm going to agree with you, but I will make an argument in your favor. We have two film charters over at Fantasy Points Data, Brett Whitefield and Chris Wecht, who have watched every quarterback on every snap at least 5 times. And they're both like Derek Carr fans. They're just like, he is underrated. He is like good on film. Last year, that offense wasn't doing him any favors, but he's a really underrated talent. And so we have this new data tool, and I was talking to them a few days ago, and I'm like looking at different metrics I know are predicted. I'm like, why does Derek Carr rank so high in this? This seems weird. I'm like, no, dude, I'm telling you, Derek Carr is super underrated. And so maybe he is. He has a great supporting cast now. He's in the Pete Carmichael offense, which, has historically done wonders for quarterbacks. We've seen productivity from like a fully cooked Drew Brees when he was 42 years old, Jameis Winston, Teddy Bridgewater, Taysom Hill, a few other, all putting up like fringe QB1 numbers. So definitely can't hate on that take.
I like the idea as a QB2, especially if you're contending and you've got hit by some injuries or bye weeks. Derek Carr's my QB2 and Scott Fishbowl for what it's worth, Hannah. So I'll take it.
Me too, actually. But I do genuinely think like at QB 28, that is ridiculously undervalued. So, you're going to get more than you paid for it. And that's the whole point, right?
Yeah.
So that's why it's mine.
Come on, Scott. Next one up. You keep telling us why we're wrong.
Yeah, this is Marvin Mims. I don't know. Anyone who was following me in April knows that this is one of my guys. I'm a big analytics guy, and I have this, model that, sorts these prospects, gives a historical grade. And just according to the numbers, my model thought Marvin Mims was like easily the second best wide receiver in this class. And obviously he's not priced as the rookie wide receiver 2. I think in my post-draft rankings, once I factored in draft capital, he was like my wide receiver 5 or wide receiver 6. But just definitely one of my guys. Insane statistical profile, and draft capital was good. Technically round 2 landing spot was really great. I thought, not immediately, there's a lot of competition for targets, but he was handpicked by Sean Payton, first draft pick Sean Payton ever made. And like, meanwhile, he's been trying to trade Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy all off season. So like the landing spot, like the player.
Yeah, it's not someone I've really considered. I think the landing spot really scared me. Dulcich is evolving a role there. Sutton previously, Judy is yet to come out but looked good at the back end of last year. Tim Patrick has performed when called upon. They've got KJ Hamler and Marquez Callaway in there as well, who are a reasonable kind of guys that fill that role. You think he can make a name for himself amongst those?
This year, I don't know. I will say, like, my pre-draft comp for him was like Tyler Lockett from a fantasy perspective, not necessarily like just how, he wasn't super productive the first 2 years of his career. He was mostly just a situational deep threat. He ran a limited route tree in college, and then, in the pros started to add more tools to his toolkit and do more. And then he exploded to be like one of the best wide receivers in football, operating primarily from the slot. And everything I just said is like exactly what I think is going to happen with Mims. Situational deep threat, but amazing in that role. And I think he's just going to be a part-time player, maybe a committee wide receiver 3 this year. So he's not, I don't have any serious best ball exposure, but in Dynasty, I have him everywhere.
Fair.
I'm just interested to know, Scott, how do you think this wide receiver room is going to kind of play out this season?
I have no idea. If you look at the numbers, Jerry Jeudy is just clearly the alpha to Courtland Sutton's beta. Like over the last 3 years, Sutton averages like 13 fantasy points per game without Jeudy and like 6 fantasy points per game with him. But Cecil Lammey, that's Denver's best beat writer, is saying Sutton looks better than he's looked in like 4 years. He's finally over this injury that took a really long time to rehab. And he looks explosive. And so like he could be a thing. And then Tim Patrick is Russ's BFF, and he had the best connection in training camp. So I really have no idea. I just do know that draft capital matters. And like, this is the one guy that Sean Payton handpicked. And so I like this as a long-term play.
It also, I guess, depends on Russell Wilson evolving in that role. We had a bit of his own troubles last year at quarterback.
Yeah, again, I don't think it really matters. Like I was saying with Pete Carmichael, like maybe or probably Sean Payton deserves more credit, but we saw Drew Brees at 42 years old who couldn't throw farther than 15 yards, put up low-end QB1 numbers. Jameis Winston, Teddy Bridgewater, bunch of players like that. So I just think this like system is almost foolproof. But Russell Wilson at this stage of his career is not anything good to me. It wouldn't surprise me even if like I said this and I got in trouble for it, but it wouldn't surprise me if like he didn't start more than 10 games in the NFL after this season. Like if he was just done. And that's how people around the like NFL film evaluators like Greg Cosell have been saying basically the same thing.
I did feel that Peyton going there was one of the better things that could have happened for Russell Wilson. I think if he's going to revive and come back and bounce back a bit from last year, there's nobody better to do it under Peyton, who's got that experience of leading that older vet QB.
There are genius play callers, and Sean Payton is at least a genius play caller for fantasy. Like, NFL people are like, Arthur Smith is brilliant, but it like doesn't help us for fantasy. Sean Payton's brilliant, and it shows in fantasy.
Fair.
The one thing I do think about Russ is that I think he knows that this is a do or die season for him. And I think he feels that he is not finished. Like he still wants to be like some fantastic QB and be known like Tom Brady. I mean, we know that's never going to happen, but I think he knows this season is do or die. And I think he will take that seriously because he is a big man of kind of how he's perceived, so I think he is really going to put in the work this season. I won't be surprised if he bounces back. But
what I've heard from my friends who are a lot more connected than I am is that a condition of Sean Payton taking this job is like he has free reign to just fully cut ties with Russ after this year. He's going to give him a shot though, and hope for the best. But the locker room also is like massively divided on Russ. Like he doesn't have too many friends in that locker room, but Tim Patrick is far and away like one of the big ones. So maybe that helps him carve out a role, but that's at least what I'm hearing.
Awesome. My second name on the list, Scott, which I'm sure you're not going to like again, is DJ Shark at the Carolina. I've been a fan of Shark since he came into the league. I just wish the guy can stay healthy. The talent, I think, is there. I just want him to stay fit. His best year, he played 15 games in 2019 with the Jags. Finished PPR as a wide receiver 17. He hasn't played more than 13 games since. There, for me, in Carolina, there is no clear wide receiver one. There's a lot of hodgepodge of people coming in with him. Thielen. They drafted Mingo. They've took Hayden Hurst at tight end. They've got a rookie quarterback. They just need someone to sort of lead that offensive team and be that figurehead. And I'm hoping Shark's talent can do it. I just want him to stay healthy.
Yeah, DJ Chark is actually one of my favorite players just because I've only ever drafted him 1 year. His sophomore season, he was like a 18th round pick in best ball. And I'm like, this guy was like a round 2 pick. Like, why not? I'll just take a shot on him. That was the only year I ever had him. So like, he's one of my most, I profited most on him throughout the career. But yeah, I don't really know. I like the quarterback. It's hard for me to imagine how targets shake up. Adam Thielen's the crafty veteran who, maybe the rookie quarterback leans on just because like he trusts him. He's not going to make too many mistakes. Or maybe it's Mingo who's like hyper athletic. The team believes in him based on this draft capital. I'm not a Mingo guy, but I like hated him the least out of everyone in the industry, is like which hated him. So I feel like I'm sort of a Mingo guy. One thing that's interesting that one of our writers is working on, Ryan Heath, he's working with our stat first read target share. And we were talking about this and how inexperienced quarterbacks really tend to lean on one wide receiver in particular. You see their wide receiver one have a really massive first read target share. They just kind of lock into that guy. And maybe that's Shark. Maybe it's Mingo. Maybe it's I have no idea. But if there is one of those guys in Carolina, whoever Bryce Young's favorite guy is going to be, there's massive fantasy potential.
Yeah. Just hope he stays fit. Scott, your next name then on the list is someone I loved. He was my wide receiver one coming into the league when he was drafted. Again, very similar. He can't get himself on a football field. Now, this isn't necessarily for injury as such. It's through his own fault. Huge talent, huge thing. I'm actually lowering my expectations and demands of him because I don't know if he ever puts himself right. And you've come up with Jameson Williams.
That's right. Jameson Williams. To me, I just really liked you had him wide receiver one. I had Drake London wide receiver one, but I think he was my wide receiver two. And in hindsight, that was probably a mistake. I was saying like, because he's probably not going to play at all this year, or at least miss almost all the year, you could probably get him cheaper next year. And I wish I like stuck to that because that was exactly the case. But in my mind, it's like, you just throw out his rookie season because they said when they drafted him, like, yeah, we might not even play him at all this year. So if you throw that out, then you're just left with this eval where you and I were both extremely high on him. It's a potent offense. And yeah, so I think he's a great value.
And there's also very little competition for targets there, right? Amon Ra broke into the side and did extremely well with everybody else going down. So other than that, there is no real direct. I mean, they brought in Marvin Jones, who actually I think first half of the season could be quite effective for him. But I think we'll see Jameson Williams, hopefully second half, clear that role as himself. But I thought Marvin Jones was a good addition for him in the short term.
Yeah, and to me, it's just like, yeah, what was his price last year? What is it this year? And what's feeding into that is like a lost year that we knew was going to be lost. And then he's suspended for the first few weeks of the season. Like, who cares? This is Dynasty. You own these guys for forever. And the fantasy playoffs matter exponentially more than the first 5 weeks.
Yeah. Hannah, you in or out of Jameson Williams?
Oh, I don't know. I kind of feel like I'm starting to go out on him. I mean, my concern is obviously it's going to be like a year and a half and he has barely set foot on an NFL field. Now, you know, maybe that isn't going to be a problem for him, but I don't know, the longer he's kind of off the field, the less comfortable I am. But like you say, I suppose his value is low at the moment, so what is there to lose? But I definitely felt higher on him before he got his 6-game ban. And then since then, I've kind of felt a bit lukewarm to him, to be honest. I don't know if he's going to be in the doghouse when he gets back or what. How much are they going to get him on the field? And I think until kind of I see him and see what he's going to be in the NFL, I probably wouldn't buy. But that's just probably because I'm a bit more risk averse than a lot of people.
Yeah, I understand both ways. As Scott said, it's only 6 games. His dynasty is still young. It's only his second year, and his 6 games is not the end of it. I think my concern is the character trait that led to that, and if there's something longer term underlying that leads to future issues again. So, an interesting one. And your next name, Hannah, is somebody else who many people were incredibly high on a year or two ago, and probably started to drop down the list. But you've got him as someone you're heading out and acquiring at the minute in Elijah Moore.
Well, I think so. Well, I know so.
The conviction in what you said there.
No, I mean, the thing is, for me, from what I understood, is that last season he fell out with the team more for kind of personal reasons, differences of opinion or whatever that might be, rather than anything to do with talent. I think he definitely showed some talent in his first season, and I know there's quite a few people in the community that still believe he is a talented football player. I think the fact that he now has a new start in Cleveland, I think is only going to be good for him. Again, the reason that I'm saying to buy him is that he's currently like somewhere ridiculous, like the wide receiver, he's in his 60s somewhere. I can't find him now, but wide receiver 53. I mean, that's like pennies, it's nothing. And I think if he manages to grab that wide receiver 2 role at Cleveland, his value is only going to increase. They're going to throw the ball more this season. We kind of need Watson to improve from what we saw at the end of the season last year, but he's had a full off season now. He'll be way more integrated in the team. I think Elijah Moore has a chance to become fantasy relevant and way more fantasy relevant than the wide receiver 53. So that's why I think you should go out and buy him.
Okay,
I think
you
should be
slightly, but go on, Scott.
I can't agree anymore. This is one of my guys. Elijah Moore has been like my guy from day one. I love me some Elijah. I was going to tell a wild story, but I don't know that I should. Love Elijah Moore. Love the landing spot. I think there's a chance he could be the wide receiver one of the team. Like, granted, I'm kind of crazy on Elijah, but I just believe so much in the talent. I could see him being used as he should have been used, as he was used in college, as this sort of PPR cheat code in the slot where you're just going out of your way to get him 9+ targets per game, seeing what he can do after the catch. And oh, by the way, he's also an extremely talented deep threat from the slot. So he could do that too. And he has unique upside for that position. And you really saw, like, I don't think DPJ is anything, but DPJ had some really productive weeks. And Deshaun Watson, like, imagine if Deshaun Watson is back to being the Deshaun Watson of old, which is like a top 5 fantasy QB every single year. So massive upside for a player I love, a player I believe in. Couldn't agree anymore. I'd tell everyone I'd be spamming trade offers out right now if I didn't already own Elijah in every single league.
Oh man, I see. I'm out on Elijah. So this is like really how it's panning out. You said you love the landing spot. I love the QB situation. I
just looked at the rest of the show sheet. We're doing this for every segment, Dan. I'm sorry.
Well, this is why you're the CEO of a major company, and I just sit here in my bedroom doing this once a week, I guess.
I mean, it's more entertaining for the viewers, right? Like Stephen A. Smith didn't make $1 million for agreeing with everyone.
Hannah done a show the other week where she talked about ADP battles and ended up agreeing with everybody on every single ADP battle, didn't you?
Yes, but we were disagreeing with consensus, all right?
Okay.
It's not my fault that I have good takes and you have bad takes, Dan. These things happen.
Fair.
Damn, shots fired from Hannah.
Hannah's better than me, so I'm not going to argue that point. So, Amari Cooper for me is a clear wide receiver one there. Yes, I love the QB situation, and I know Moore's got talent, but it is a busy receiver room. They have got DPJ, you mentioned. They brought David Bell, they drafted last year. They've drafted Cedric Tillman this year. They've got Marquise Goodwin coming in. David Njoku's come back. They brought in Jalen Darden for a deep threat. There is a lot of receivers in there that's going to need the ball.
Only 2 good ones.
Yeah.
That's my opinion. And Amari Cooper, by the way, like, are either of you guys DFS players?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm a big time DFS player, and for years, Amari Cooper has been the most cornerback sensitive wide receiver in football. Like anytime he goes up against a top 15 cornerback who shadows, like just expect zeros. Like he just ghosts. And he's also he has the widest split home road splits of any wide receiver. This has been going on for forever. I've said either, you know, like when he's away from his wife, he just goes out and parties nonstop deep into the night, or he needs to do a promo deal with Tempur-Pedic or something. But last year he averaged 16 DK fantasy points per game more at home than on the road. I tweeted this into all right. So last year, he averaged 18.2 fantasy points per game at home, 11.3 on the road. Meanwhile, DPJ averaged 12.2 fantasy points per game on the road. So he passed Amari Cooper. His first read target share ranked 7th at home. On the road, it was like 57th. And this has been going on since 2017, averaging 18 fantasy points per game at home, 11 fantasy points per game on the road. So even if you don't want Elijah in Dynasty, get him in DFS in weeks Cleveland is on the road. Apart
from they were at Buffalo last year, because I think Cooper.
That's right. Well, that's right. But that was a neutral site, so it didn't factor into the splits.
So every rule there's an exception, right?
I guess so. Yeah. Well, that was his best game. So in neutral, if they go to the Super Bowl playing a neutral field, he's going to go neutral.
Get him in. Get him in. Yeah. Fair. Scott, move us on. Who else we want to talk about?
Yeah. What about your player?
Oh, I missed my one. Oh yeah, I did. Silly me. J.K. Dobbins. And well, before I say why, Scott, do you want to disagree with me?
Yeah.
You can let me try first.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Awesome. I just think he's, other than the injury, which is a concern, and the Lamar Jackson being a heavy running quarterback, J.K. Dobbins is still in charge of that backfield. He's still the RB1 on the side. I think he can put up top RB2 numbers for a side for you if he can stay healthy again. I think he's got an elite talent there. There's no competition. Gus Edwards isn't a talent. He will have, and you won't get this, Scott, but Hannah will, Keaton Mitchell to worry about down the line. So that's a concern, but I'll cope with that. Scott, for the background, I'm an ECU Pirates fan. Purely on the basis there's not many NFL players from ECU Pirates, and I follow them. So Keaton Mitchell and Zay Jones are my most owned players in Dynasty, purely to root for the guys that I like and support. So all off season, Keaton Mitchell is the guy I've been picking up everywhere.
How'd you become a fan of them?
I know somebody who went there.
Okay.
And kind of a friend of mine went there, and I sort of watching it from there. So, picked up the ECU Pirates. And I do like the fact that they're not an Alabama and LSU, and they don't put 15 people into the league every year and so on. So, odd small numbers, and you can pick them, and you can root for them, and you can follow these guys' careers, and you feel a bit more in touch with them.
All right. So, you done?
Yeah, go on.
All right. So here's where I'm going to agree with you. You mentioned Lamar Jackson being a heavy.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Keaton Mitchell was a threat to him. I thought that was your agreeing point.
You mentioned Lamar Jackson's a heavy running quarterback. The good thing about him is, unlike Jalen Hurts, he's not so much of a goal line threat. And also there is a cheat code there with hypermobile quarterbacks that boosts a running back's efficiency metrics. And J.K. Dobbins, far and away the most efficient running back in fantasy football over the past 3 years by fantasy points versus weighted opportunity. That's a really important metric. The most efficient. Last year, coming back from his second IR stint, immediately week 14 on, was one of only a handful of running backs who averaged at least 100 yards from scrimmage per game. The only difference is J.K. Dobbins did it on 6.9 yards per carry. The counter argument is he's typically a committee back, but there's a new regime. And so who knows, maybe he could be the guy, maybe he could be the bell cow. But because I have to disagree with you, just to keep this going, it's just like for me, a fundamental strategy perspective, how I approach Dynasty. And that's just like, I only ever get my running backs via the rookie draft. I want them when they're at their youngest and in their peak years, and they don't have a ton of injuries like J.K. Dobbins. And so I just like full fade running backs and startups, and I'll never trade for them unless I'm like super RB needy and it's like giving away a round 3 pick for James Conner or something just to get a starter in the lineup. Yeah,
I agree. At this stage of the year, especially, there's no way I'm going out and trading for running backs. I might think about it come October, if need be. But I was looking more at startups of that. There is a pattern I've just noticed to my players: Wan'Dale Robinson, DJ Shark, and J.K. Dobbins. Not one of them can stay on the field for health reasons. I think all of them have got talent, and all of them can do well, and all of them haven't quite reached the potential because of injuries. And I guess I'm still hoping that that's not a regular pattern and that one of them can stay healthy. So next up, who we got? Go on, Scott.
I got Christian Watson. My player comp for him coming out was if Randy Moss were mortal. And it's just like, I'm not a film guy, but like when I watched his film, I'm reminded of Randy Moss. Or if I watch Randy Moss's film, he would remind me the most of Christian Watson than anyone else. And like, he had the sickest year ever. Like, he deserves way more credit for how impressive that year was. He led all wide receivers in fantasy points per route run. And sure, he is a touchdown regression candidate, sort of like the opposite of Deontay Johnson. But I also think that's something he brings to the table with his like freakish athleticism and the way he moves and glides across the field effortlessly, like a Randy Moss, that he is going to get, a short dump off and house it for 87 yards. And I just think he's like that level of a talent I talked about before. So even if you take out touchdowns, yards per route run, it was a historically great rookie season, despite playing with, Aaron Rodgers, who had a broken thumb. He was productive with Jordan Love. He doesn't have too much meaningful competition for targets, and just another player I really believe in. I want to get as many sophomore wide receivers as possible because all those guys look incredible to me. But he's one of the better ones at price.
Yeah. How do you agree?
I actually don't. I think he's really expensive at the moment.
What's the ADP?
Wide receiver 21 on Fantasy Pros.
Okay. In FFPC, he was going round 4. Yeah, round 4. So probably a little earlier. Just the problem is like, to me, I look at round 4 and like, I hate everyone except for Watson. But yeah, sorry, go ahead, Hannah.
I don't disagree with you that I think he does have some talent. My concern is I think he is priced personally at this point because people have an expectation and kind of a little bit at his ceiling at this stage, because he's going to have a new quarterback. We don't know what John Love is going to be. He might be fantastic. Great. But I think there are going to be some growing pains in this offense. And I do think that his price is probably going to drop before it rises again. So I personally don't want to buy him at the moment. But I think if halfway through the season, they're struggling on offense and he's not putting up the points that people think he would or should, then I would definitely consider going out and buying him. I'm not saying longer term he's not going to do something, but I think for now he's too expensive for me.
I think as well, the way back into the season when he had a really good mid-season and then he had the 4 games, didn't he, where he scored 7 touchdowns in 4 games. And then their touchdowns sort of dried up. Was that a case of him just breaking out and being a little bit more unknown to defenses and scheming against him and they got a bit wiser to it?
So again, that's not repeatable. He had 4 games. He had 8 touchdowns on 12 touches. Like, that's impossible. But he wasn't so much of a touchdown regression candidate to me, just because he led the league in percentage of targets inside the 10-yard line and percentage of targets coming deep, which lends itself to more touchdowns. He also dropped like a few targets that were like 40 plus yards through the air and no one around him and would have been a guaranteed 80-yard touchdown. So that's some positive regression. But again, you could just he had like the 3rd best rookie season ever by touchdown adjusted yards per route run. But even if you want to throw out touchdowns, it was still a really good year just by yards per route run.
Yeah, I mean, one of the worst games he had where he played a solid game was 8 yards per catch on 6 targets. So phenomenal return if he's doing that. His work after the catch, I think, is great. He's so elusive, as you say, and he's got that deep threat after receiving.
He wasn't a starter until week 10 last year. And from that point on, he ranked 10th in fantasy points per game. So we did see some productive, and that was ahead of all other rookies, by the way. But yeah, really like Christian Watson.
I get it, the player. ADP wise, he's just behind Debo, Jerry Jeudy, just ahead of Drake London.
Oh, he's ahead of Drake London now.
According to Fancy Pros, he's got him 21 and Drake London's at 23.
I'd probably rather have Drake London.
Amari Cooper's
really
at
close.
18. Amari Cooper's at 18. He's going to play 17 home games this year for you as well.
Yeah, I'd rather have Drake London. Yeah, for sure. So should have picked him, but
just wait till 67 and get DJ Shark, same player. Hannah, you haven't picked one. Chuck one at us for a while.
So my next one is Sky Moore on the Kansas City Chiefs, wide receiver. Look, I don't think he really has shown us much so far, but we know that rookies in Andy Reid's scheme often struggle to kind of get to grips with the playbook and to produce in their first year. I think there's been a lot of buzz around him, or starting to, kind of going into training camp, and how he's looking like he might have kind of finally got to grips with it and potentially could step up this year. He's still, to me, really quite cheap. So I personally would be going to buy him now, before he starts to potentially do things in training camp and we get more buzz, and to hopefully show something on the field as well. He's currently wide receiver 59. Like, somebody on this team, apart from Kelsey, is, well, we said this last year, nobody did they? But surely somebody's going to start to step up and take some fantasy kind of relevance. And to me, I think the most likely is Sky Moore. So, I mean, I think at wide receiver 59, I'm buying him and seeing what he does, because surely if he does anything, his value will rise.
All right. So you ruined the streak we had. You disagreed with me. Now I have to disagree with you.
Rude.
I know. So
and me and Scott are going to be on the same page for the first time in the last 50 minutes.
Let's do it. Yeah. So I just didn't like Sky Moore last year. Like, people were talking about him as like this really great prospect, and I just didn't see that by the metrics I was looking at, the metrics that like matter most to my model. So his underwhelming rookie season, that was kind of, not at all surprising to me, and didn't really change my opinion on him. I'll also say, like, I'm a big time Kadarius Toney guy, which like that could totally blow up in my face, but really bullish on him. And I'm a big time Justin Ross guy. Like, I just love, like zero floor, massively high ceiling players, because that's what matters in fantasy. And to me, there's like an 80% chance Justin Ross is nothing, and a 20% chance he's, 90% or the same guy he was when he outproduced T. Higgins as a freshman at Clemson. So I gravitate a little more to his upside, especially at cost.
Cool. I told you, Hannah. So you know how I've been feeling for the last 45 minutes.
Yeah, it's true. I still disagree, but we'll catch up at the end of the season, Scott, and see who does what with that. I think it's going to be a really interesting offense, isn't it? And to be fair, anybody could probably break out. My concern with Kadarius Toney is that he's great at these kind of Mickey Mouse type routes. Like, you have to try and get him the ball. Like, I'm not convinced that he's like the world's best route runner. Maybe they don't need him to be that. Maybe they can just get the ball in his hands and he can go. But I don't know. I'm not fully sold yet.
So an argument in your favor is the Athletics beat writer. I just tweeted it out. I forget his name, but he said Sky Moore is looking likeliest to be the team's starting slot wide receiver, which is like really bad news for me and my Kadarius Toney love, because he is so much better suited for the slot. I don't think that's right. I think he's like a fine route runner. He is more limited than a typical team's wide receiver one, but he's also like probably the best after the catch receiver in the NFL. Like, it's him or Debo. And just like on tape, to me, like what he does, no one moves like him. It looks like his ACLs are made of adamantium, or he's like the scene from Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man where like everyone is moving in slow motion and he's not. And that's like a large part of the Chiefs offense is these manufactured touches, these screen throws, especially the shovel pass touchdowns near the end zone. Over the past 2 seasons, Mahomes is averaging 14 shovel pass passing touchdowns per year. And it's who gets that role? Like, why wouldn't it be Tony? Because like what he does after the catch is so much more impressive to me than anything Sky Moore can do. And I do think he has underrated upside as a deep threat, at the very least. You know, like even if he is a limited route runner, he could run the go route. He's pretty fast. He's pretty athletic. And then you could have all these, low ADOT after the catch production that doesn't really necessitate great route running.
Yeah, I've always said in an offense where you don't know who's the A and who's the B, I guess you always take the cheaper one, which I think would fit Sky more. I think Tony is considerably higher on ADP currently.
I think the problem is like they need a wide receiver one. What Hannah was saying was like, yeah, no one saw it coming that like there wasn't going to be a single wide receiver to finish top 15 in fantasy points per game on the team. And that's an outlier. Like there's going to be one this year. I'm pretty confident. But part of what contributed to that was they really had this deep wide receiver by committee situation after Juju and MVS, where it was like 3 or 4 guys rotating in and out. And like maybe they do that at every position and that crushes them. But Brett Veach is calling Tony the wide receiver one. And, you could just write that off as, typical GM speak, coach speak, whatever. But he told us before Patrick Mahomes ever started his second game, he said, I'm watching this guy in practice and this is like the best quarterback I've ever seen. So his word at least matters a little bit to me. And he has said like he can do a lot more. We like him as a deep threat. And so that's kind of what I'm banking on. But yeah, he's getting expensive and there's a number of risks we haven't hit on, like another player who can't get on the field, can't stay healthy. He's a head case off the field. So for sure, a lot of outs. And, if one of those hits, could be Sky Moore time.
Yeah, the KC offense outside of the lead guys is the wide receiver room is one I've just been avoiding continually. Apart from in DFS and season long on best ball, where I've got quite a bit of MVS and just hoping for one of those hit weeks to come through here and there, which I think he's capable of being the vet receiver on that team. So we're moving on for time a little bit. So there's a few names left. I don't know if anyone wants to bring anyone up or are we happy just to leave those be? Is there anyone in particular you want to talk about, Scott?
No, it's your call.
You're happy? Hannah?
Yeah, just before we finish, I've just got to put this comment on because it supports what I said. Thank you, Mr. Scampers. Sorry. No, I'm good.
Nice of your mum to register, wasn't it, and comment.
Well, someone's got to stick up for me. No one else is going to.
Awesome. I know you've got something you want to mention, Scott, so you've been doing Big at Fancy Pros, but before you do, something we do every week when we have a guest questions. We have a guest on who poses a question to next week's guest, not knowing who they're going to be or what it's going to be about. So last week we had Jason Snyder, who the writer of Dynasty Nerds. He posed the following question for you. And he said, please, can you tell us about a relationship that has developed as a result of fantasy sports and how that relationship would have been different had you not been part of the fantasy industry?
Yeah, I saw this question
outside of actual fantasy question we've had. So thanks for that, Jason.
Yeah, I just about all my friends or these days are from the fantasy industry, except for like all my buddies from high school. So I could go a lot of different ways with that. We have our longest running Dynasty League, the Lemon League, the Elite Lemonade League is what it is. Yeah, we've been in a DM group for about 9 years and we talk all day, every day. Might not have, made it as far in the industry as I did without help from some of those names like John Proctor, who I did a DFS podcast with, my first ever podcast, Mike Beers, who kind of like single-handedly taught me Excel, Curtis Patrick, TJ Calkins. Those are two of the best Dynasty players of all time. And I guess a funny anecdote from that is Jen Ryan is in that league, and I was working outside of the industry at an air compressor company, and this woman there was like, "Oh, my daughter Jen, like a small company, only like 20 people. Oh, my daughter Jen loves fantasy. Oh, you would love my daughter Jen. She loves fantasy." And it took a year and a half until we figured out that her daughter was Jen Ryan, who's like in the industry and was in this DM group. So I guess that's a kind of funny small world, fantasy related story.
Awesome. Scott, can you pose a question to whomever we have on next? Player related, situation related, trade related, relationship related, if you will.
Who was your favorite player in your childhood, and why? And do you think he's good today? Like, do you think he would be good today?
About childhood, because I didn't watch it for long. Mine was Megatron. That's what got me into this game. And yeah, he would still be awesome now. Yeah. He would still be insane now.
I was weird. I always picked like bad players. I don't know what it was. Like Ron Dane was my favorite Giant for a really long time. Ray Ordonez was my favorite baseball player.
Yeah. Awesome. Great question. So Scott, new into your role, CEO, Fantasy Points. Tell us what's going on there, what you're plugging, what you're working on, what's coming from you guys.
Yeah, I'm Scott Barrett. You can follow me at Scott Barrett DFB on Twitter. You can check out our website, fantasypoints.com. And we just launched this new data tool, data.fantasypoints.com. Really think it's the sickest thing ever. If you're a stat nerd like I am, you can just live in there. We have access to just about any stat you can ever think of. The best, most predictive ones, for quarterbacks, fantasy points per dropback, for receivers, yards per route run, a bunch of stats other people don't have, like first read, target share, pressure rate over expectation. I don't know, a million different data points. And then it's customizable in a way that no one else is. So you can, we have exponentially more stats than anyone else, because you can look at first read, target share in games the player was trailing only in the red zone and in the fourth quarter with 15 mile per hour winds. In games they're underdog. Like, I just go on and on. It's pretty crazy. A number of different split tools. You could look at it on the player level, team level, defense level. We think this is what other businesses sell to other fantasy businesses for like $20K per year for, and we put it out for $50 because we're crazy like that. And for this week, it's entirely free. So if you're someone who loves stats or gambles on the NFL, make sure you check that out.
I will be. Yeah, I will be. It sounds phenomenal to have that much customizable data and manipulation at hand, rather than it just be everyone goes. There's loads of sites that do generics, and there's loads of sites where you can customize bits, but to get that level of integration is a lot of data entry for your team to sit and work through.
It took us 2 years to build. We were hoping we would get it out last year, but we're glad we ended up waiting. We have a team of charters. We have multiple full-time employees and developers. And we're really proud of it. We launched yesterday, and we did a live stream to celebrate where me and Chris and Brett literally popped bottles of champagne on stream. So that was fun.
Nice. I don't know, Fantasy Points helped us out. We had our recent UK FFC event where the subscriptions come to us. So thank you for helping contribute to that. I know me and Hannah are appreciative, and so are the UK community here. So anything we can do, let us know.
No pleasure. I'm trying to get better acquainted with UK fans of fantasy football, because it's only a matter of time until we see the London Knights, or the London Knights in a couple of years, right?
July 13th, 2024, UK FFC, our expo, if you will. This year we had Scott Fishbowl drafting live in London with it as well. Bob Lung made the trip over. We had people from South Africa come in especially. So book yourself on a plane and come and say hi to over 100 of them in one spot in one day, Scott.
Oh man, that sounds like a blast.
And we drink till 4 a.m. with Bob Lung.
You guys are big drinkers. I hope I can keep up.
Good. Again, Scott, thank you so much for coming on. I know you must be incredibly busy now. Really appreciate it. Thanks for disagreeing with everything I had to say and a little bit of what Hannah had to say. I, for one, am going to go and get me a fantasy point subscription and play with it, because I love playing with that stuff, and the fact it's so customizable is awesome. So thank you very much for your time, Scott.
Yeah, I appreciate it. You got to get me on next year and rub it in my face when you were right and I was wrong about just about every player.
When Wan'Dale Robinson finishes as wide receiver 62, I will be laughing at you. Yes, sir.
He's the new Megatron.
Yeah. Awesome. Guys, thank you very much. We will be back next week.